The Ukraine war rages on, dragging ever closer to the 4-year mark with no end in sight. Ceasefire negotiations have failed at every turn as Vladimir Putin drags his heels. Russia's leader doesn't want his war to end. He thinks he's winning and he won't stop until he ends Ukraine's sovereignty. As for Ukraine, it's still defending itself while inflicting heavy damage on Russia with its deep strikes in Russian territory. But now the future looks very different. 10 nations are ready to invade Ukraine. But hold on for a moment, it's not what you think, as this could be great news for Ukraine's future after the war ends. On August 27, Euromaidan Press reported that about 10 countries, all of which are members of the so-called Coalition of the Willing created to support Ukraine, are preparing to send their soldiers into Ukraine. This is a huge turnaround from previous policy. In the past, Western nations supporting Ukraine have sent weapons and provided training, but they've outright refused to put boots on the ground. Now, a new plan is being formulated that could destroy Putin's ambition to take Ukraine forever. The outlet says that the plan is one of several being discussed by Ukraine's Western allies as they grapple with the mechanics of providing Ukraine with security guarantees once the war ends. That plan, Euromaidan Press says, will involve 3 layers of defense that involve Ukraine and its Western partners working together to ensure that nothing like Putin's February 2022 invasion can happen again. Layer 1 in this plan is something that's been seen many times before: the creation of a demilitarized zone, or DMZ. According to the International Committee of the Red Cross, a DMZ is an area between 2 countries, agreed upon between the countries involved in a war, that cannot be occupied for military purposes. Think of it like a buffer zone that also serves as an early warning system if either country gets aggressive. To continue a war, one of the 2 nations would have to cross the DMZ, offering the other side plenty of time to prepare to renew the fight while drawing international condemnation in the process. Perhaps the most famous example of a modern-day DMZ comes from North and South Korea. Roughly following the demarcation line between the 2 countries that was established in the wake of World War II, this DMZ runs for about 150 miles across the Korean peninsula. It's also subject to more problems than you might expect, as tit-for-tat military actions often take place inside this DMZ. As recently as August 23, the BBC reported that South Korean soldiers were forced to fire warning shots at their North Korean counterparts when the latter troops briefly crossed the DMZ separating the 2 states. The North Korean soldiers eventually crossed back to their side of the line. But this incident shows that DMZs are often tense places where troops from both parties often clash. For Russia and Ukraine, any DMZ would have to be far larger than the one in the Korean peninsula. The border between the 2 countries stretches for 1,426 miles, meaning that any DMZ would have to be massive and require a substantial number of troops from both sides to enforce. Ukraine will also be wary of Belarus, which Putin used as one of his springboards into Ukraine during his initial invasion. The border between Ukraine and Belarus is about 673 miles, with the official Ukraine website noting that this border is already pockmarked with barbed wire and similar defences. The odds are that Ukraine would want to create a DMZ between itself and Belarus too. That means a commitment of enough troops to oversee more than 2,000 miles of border territory if this first layer of defence is to become a reality. Interestingly, the proposed DMZ between Russia and Ukraine may not look like a traditional DMZ. Rather than being staffed by soldiers from Russia and Ukraine on their respective sides, this first layer may instead be controlled by peacekeepers from a third country, says Euromaidan Press. Which country that would be hasn't been specified, and both Russia and Ukraine would have to agree on who provides the troops that stand between them. That could be a problem, but the concept of having a DMZ staffed by a neutral party is at least sound. Which leads to the second layer, Ukraine itself. Ukrainian forces that are armed and trained by NATO would serve as Ukraine's second line of defense, which essentially translates to Ukraine maintaining the same armed forces that it's built to fight against Russia. This second layer could end up being a major problem for Putin. He's often cited the demilitarization of Ukraine as one of Russia's key goals of the war, going back as far as the very first morning of its invasion, the Atlantic Council said in February. Demilitarization was also part of the early and failed peace talks held between Russia and Ukraine in 2022. Back then, Russia demanded that Ukraine reduce the size of its armed forces by about 95%, which would essentially have left the country with a skeleton force of 50,000 troops that Russia could overrun at any time. Obviously, Ukraine said no. Now, the second proposed line of defense flies in the face of what Putin wants by proposing that Ukraine maintain a standing army that is large and westernized. Essentially, the coalition of the willing is saying that some level of the support that its members are already providing to Ukraine will have to be maintained as part of its new plan. On the training front, Ukraine's forces are already receiving plenty of help from the West through a UK-led program named Operation Interflex. That program reached its third anniversary in June, and it's been responsible for training over 56,000 Ukrainian soldiers so far. You could consider this program a precursor to the coalition of the willing itself, as the training being provided involves the UK working alongside 13 partner nations that ensure Ukraine's troops are capable of using the weapons that the West provides. Presumably, the second layer of the coalition's new defence plan will involve an expansion of this operation. Right now, the UK works alongside Australia, Denmark, Finland, Albania, Estonia, Kosovo, Lithuania, Romania, Norway, Sweden, Canada, the Netherlands and New Zealand to provide its training. This program could grow extensively during peacetime, perhaps becoming some form of academy through which Ukraine's troops are further integrated into the NATO way of war. Putin would hate that. He would be forced to sit back and watch as NATO's Western influence embeds itself deeper into Ukraine's military culture, which is the precise scenario he wanted to avoid with his demands for demilitarization. So consider this second layer as a direct rebuke to Putin. Russia may want to defang Ukraine. The coalition of the willing will make sure that doesn't happen by ensuring that Ukraine's own military remains strong enough to defend the country against Russia should Putin order his forces to cross the DMZ. Now, the first two layers of defense cover the immediate threat from Russia. A DMZ serves as an early warning system. With the continued arming and training of Ukraine's military once peace is negotiated, ensuring that Ukraine can mount a rapid frontline response in the event of war breaking out again. Then there's the third line of defense. This is where the invasion by 10 nations happens. According to Euromaidan Press, this third line would involve a deployment of European forces deeper into Ukraine, with logistical support provided to this deployment by the United States. The UK would spearhead this deployment, the outlet says, as the country has already suggested sending Eurofighter Typhoons into Ukraine, along with a brigade of up to 5,000 military personnel. Those soldiers would serve two purposes. First, they will be able to support the second layer of defense by providing ongoing training to Ukraine's forces. Second, those troops would mean that NATO offers a constant presence inside Ukraine to serve as a deterrent to Russia. It could be that the third layer of defense essentially acts as a way to backdoor the protections that NATO's Article 5 offers to its members, given that it appears that Ukraine not becoming a NATO member is one of Russia's conditions for peace. Think about it like this. If Russia attacks Ukraine and happens to kill members of the European peacekeeping force, that could be considered a direct attack against the nation that's deployed those troops. Could that trigger Article 5? Maybe and maybe not. But the very fact that the question has to be asked could be enough to dissuade Russia from launching a second invasion should Putin decide that the first two layers of defense aren't enough to stop it. It's not 100% clear which countries will provide the troops for this third layer. Euromaidan Press offers some names, including the UK, Canada, France and Australia. All could send troops into western Ukraine, it says, and it's notable that 3 of those 4 nations are already part of Operation Interflex. The same outlet says that the president of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, has already said that soldiers from his country could be part of peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. Lithuania has also declared that it's ready to send soldiers into Ukraine, and you have to imagine that the other 2 Baltic nations of Estonia and Latvia are willing to do the same. All told, Euromaidan Press reports about 10 countries are willing to contribute to this third layer of defense. And Ukraine certainly seems happy with this idea. The head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, has already praised this new plan, noting that it will offer Ukraine a mix of military, economic, and political support in the aftermath of the Ukraine war. He also mentions that this proposed three-layer system of defense represents a remarkable turnaround from where the situation seemed to be heading as recently as last spring. Indeed, the last meeting in the White House has become a breakthrough point in a number of things, brought clarity in terms of steps like forming the setting of a security guarantees and pursuance of US weapons for Ukraine's defense through European financial instruments. The Financial Times reports him as saying. Speaking of the US, that leads to America's role in this new three-layered security plan. One thing that's known for sure is that US troops won't be setting foot inside Ukraine. US President Donald Trump made that clear following his August White House meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, after which he said, "When it comes to security, Europeans are willing to put people on the ground. We're willing to help them with things, especially probably by air." Trump didn't clarify what he meant at the time, but now the US role seems to be clearer. The Financial Times says that the US will be providing intelligence assets and battlefield oversight as part of the new layered strategy. That will involve it taking direct part in a European-led air defense shield for Ukraine, the outlet says, which is where the UK's mention of deploying Eurofighter Typhoons to Ukraine comes into play. These fighter jets are distinctly European in origin, and they pack an impressive aerial punch. Capable of reaching speeds up to 1,550 miles per hour and with a range of about 1,800 miles, these jets are ideal for patrolling Ukraine's skies and offering a fast response to any aerial threat that Russia might present. However, they, like pretty much every fighter jet in the NATO infrastructure, are reliant on US intelligence to achieve their full potential. That's the role that the US will play in this new defense strategy. It'll be a coordinator of sorts, ensuring that the European assets being deployed in Ukraine can achieve their ultimate goal of stopping Russia from launching a follow-up invasion should a peace deal be reached. The Financial Times spoke to 4 officials who are close to the matter to get more details. Senior US officials have since told European counterparts in multiple discussions that Washington would be prepared to contribute strategic enablers, including intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance (ISR), command and control, and air defense assets to enable any European-led deployment on the ground, the outlet reports. It also says that there's always the possibility that the US could rescind this offer. It has form in that regard, as the US briefly halted intelligence sharing with Ukraine back in March, in what appeared to be a pressure tactic designed to convince Zelenskyy to negotiate a ceasefire. However, the US posture has changed since then. The country is now more firmly in Ukraine's corner than it was in March. Plus, the US would be motivated to serve in a supporting role as part of a three-layer plan because doing so achieves Trump's ultimate objective of bringing the Ukraine war to an end. So, it appears that a plan is in place. But there's a big caveat to all of this that hasn't been covered yet. The 10-nation invasion of Ukraine, along with the three-layer security guarantee, can only happen if the Ukraine war ends. And for that to come, the odds are that some sort of negotiation is going to have to take place in which Russia agrees to all of this happening. Putin may have other ideas. Russia has already said repeatedly that it's opposed to any European peacekeepers entering Ukraine. On August 27, which was well after Putin met with Trump in Alaska to discuss a potential peace deal, Kremlin mouthpiece Dmitry Peskov reasserted that Russia won't agree to allowing the third layer in the new defense plan to be put in place. In fact, at the very beginning, it was the advancement of NATO military infrastructure and the infiltration of this military infrastructure into Ukraine that could probably be named among the root causes of the conflict situation that arose, he said. So we have a negative attitude towards these discussions. This isn't to say that Russia outright disagrees with the notion of having some sort of security force operating in Ukraine to prevent the possibility of war arising again, and it just so happens to have an idea about which country should provide that force: China. Despite its claims of neutrality and its supposed desire to see an end to the Ukraine war, China has supported Putin's ambitions in several ways. It's happily pumped billions of dollars into the Russian economy by buying massive quantities of Russian oil since the Ukraine war started. In August, China has been taking advantage of more Russian oil becoming available as Indian demand for Russia's most valuable resource has declined in the wake of Trump implementing tariffs against the country. China has also spent most of the war selling dual-use components, which can serve both commercial and military purposes to Russia. Many see this as China's way of supporting the Russian military without providing weapons directly. Still, China has claimed that it would be happy to serve in the peacekeeping role. August 23 saw the Kyiv Independent report that German media outlets believe that China is ready to go. However, it has a condition. It will only send its forces into Ukraine if they're deployed as part of a mandate from the United Nations. There's a whiff of Chinese opportunism here. Operating under a UN mandate lends legitimacy to China sending its forces into Ukraine, allowing it to further integrate itself with the partners it would have to work alongside as part of this mandate. All the while, China would be expanding its influence inside Europe due to the mere fact that its soldiers are operating inside Ukraine. Russia would be delighted, of course. It would have an ally serving as a supposed peacekeeper inside the country that Putin wants to subjugate. It's not much of a stretch to assume that Russia would want China to act as its eyes and ears within Ukraine under this sort of arrangement, perhaps revealing information that allows Russia to choose the perfect time to strike again. Obviously, Ukraine has said no to any Chinese involvement in a peacekeeping force. Newsweek reported on August 22 that Zelenskyy had refused any inkling of Chinese involvement as he blames Beijing for not doing enough, perhaps not even doing anything, to prevent Russia from invading in the first place. Plus, he says that China has helped Russia throughout the war by opening the drone market, which is likely a reference to China selling dual-use components that can be used to build drones to Russia. Still, China is quick to claim that it would be the perfect choice as a peacekeeper. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said as much to the state-run Global Times, Newsweek reports. China has always acted openly and above board on the Ukraine crisis, adhering to an objective and fair stance, and all parties are well aware of this, Mao claimed. We believe that all sides should uphold a common, comprehensive, cooperative and sustainable security concept and work to promote a political resolution of the Ukraine crisis. Ukraine disagrees. China's actions don't match the country's words when it comes to maintaining neutrality. Rather, China has used the Ukraine war as an opportunity to buy cheap Russian oil by the truckload, with its selling of dual-use components helping to prop up the fight that Putin started. China does sell products to Ukraine as well. It exported $381 million of products to Ukraine in May 2025 alone, according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity. However, Beijing's willingness to play both sides while appearing to favor Russia, all while calling for an end to the war, smacks of the sort of hypocrisy that makes it wholly unsuitable to provide a peacekeeping force, at least in Ukraine's view. So, back to the three-layered plan. If executed, this plan could end up sounding the death knell for Putin's desire to make Ukraine part of the Russian Federation. The combination of a DMZ, continued militarization of Ukraine, and forces from 10 countries operating inside Ukraine would make a future invasion following a peace agreement practically impossible. Russia wouldn't just be picking a fight with Ukraine in this situation, it would potentially have to attack countries that are part of NATO. A trap would be sprung, and Russia would have to face a force far larger than the Ukrainian military that it's already struggling to overcome. But the question remains, for all of the talk, is it even possible for the three-layered security guarantee to be put in place? Only time will tell, and a lot will depend on the situation inside Ukraine if and when peace terms are agreed. Now, Ukraine may not even have to wait for 10 other countries to invade before it becomes safe. Right now, it's causing a ton of damage to Russia thanks to an upgrade of its deep strike campaign that could take Russia's oil refineries offline forever. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more videos covering the latest developments in the Ukraine war.